Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. I just got back from Copenhagen, where I spent a few days performing at the Copenhagen Jazz Festival with my dad's group, the Ben Sidran Quartet. We played for 3 nights at this classic jazz club there called the Jazzhuis Montmartre. It's a club that has been part of the European jazz club circuit for many years, and it was the scene of many great historic jazz moments. Copenhagen, as it turns out, is a city in which many classic jazz musicians decided to settle, and so they have their own kind of personal history with jazz music. And being there for the jazz festival, it seemed like a great opportunity to explore the terrain. I took advantage of the fact that I was going to be there for a few days to walk and talk primarily with my dad, and we kind of explored the scene together. We were those guys with microphones in our hands, and every time we ran into somebody that we wanted to talk to, we just kind of grabbed them for a second and had this extended conversation over the course of a few days that covered the range of topics that I think a lot of jazz musicians are talking about today anyway, and which have come up often in these conversations on The Third Story. One of the things that happens here is, in this episode, I think you'll feel, is there's a shift that takes place in the last third of it, where up until then, there's a kind of an attitude among most of the musicians and the conversation in general about whether or not the state of education in jazz is a good thing or a bad thing, and whether or not the bad old days were actually pretty good. And then we went to a jam session, we heard some young cats play, these young players, really young, like 20, 21-year-olds, who were absolutely phenomenal. And you feel a shift, you feel a kind of optimism and a hope for the future and the significance and importance of jazz and American music and popular culture in the world. So I really feel transformed by this experience. It wasn't just an exercise in journalism, it was an actual life event that happened, and I feel really fortunate to have been there capturing it and carrying on with my father and my friends to try to create something. It's an interesting thing when your personal life intersects with your work. I suppose that's what I've always been interested in with The Third Story, and I got to make a little example of it this week. Occasionally you'll hear a musical interlude here. Most of them were captured at the Jazzhuis Montmartre, and most of them are us, the sound of our quartet playing. However, there are a few little street scenes I captured as well. The trad bands that you hear in the background are just the cats that I heard on the street. Now, I'm back in Brooklyn, but the festival continues as I speak to you right now. In fact, it's festival season right now, and I'm about to get on a bus and head to the Newport Jazz Festival, once again with my recorder in my hand and my father in tow, to try to capture some more great documents for the future and for this podcast. In the meantime, if you like what you hear, you can subscribe at third-story.com. You can like me, The Third Story with Leo Sidran, on Facebook, or follow me on Twitter at Leo Sidran. Also, if you dig it, feel free to go to iTunes and leave a review. You'd be surprised what an impact it could make. Without any further delay, here is what happened when I spent a few days in Copenhagen at the Jazz Festival. I'm affectionately referring to it as Welcome to Copenhagen, and you'll see why.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Copenhagen.
You wrote a prose poem about Copenhagen, and about the Jazz Festival in Copenhagen, and about the ghosts of the jazz greats who lived here before.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
You did that last night.
That's what I did, in the middle of the night. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I wrote this thing, and I had to contribute something, so I decided this is what I would contribute.
Now you got to start it from the beginning.
The Copenhagen Jazz Festival is traditionally the start of the summer season here, and this year is no exception. Spring's been a little late, if not entirely delayed, and people have been grumbling about the gray and the cold, but yesterday, the day before the official opening of the festival, the weather broke, and now it's like 75 degrees here and sunny, and people are emerging from the shadows and out from under the rocks, and it's like the desert at the first sign of rain. Flowers everywhere. Riding bicycles, of course, because it's Copenhagen. But the demographics of the city are also changing. It used to be a city of older folks, anchored to social welfare. Now it's teeming with these young people. A lot of colleges have opened up here. The government has decided that the education business is a good business to be in. None of the kids in Denmark want to be out in the boondocks, so they're coming to Copenhagen. And the place is experiencing the same high rents and gentrification as urban centers everywhere. It really feels different. The last time I was here, of course, it was in the winter, and the hawk came in off of the sea with all talons blazing, but this is a kinder, gentler Copenhagen, I think. At the same time, though, you can see why Shakespeare located Hamlet, the king of existentialism, in this country. It's low, it's flat, it's open to question. The winter wind comes in and it cuts you down as you wait for the light to change. And of course, everybody does wait for the light to change. You can be standing on a completely deserted corner in the middle of the night, and if there's somebody across the street, they're waiting for the light to change just like you are. Nobody moves. In the spring, it's the same way. It's as if the past never existed, though. Everybody's standing, waiting, but they got a smile on their face. To be or not to be, as the Prince of the Danes said. That is the normal, everyday question here. Of course, Dizzy Gillespie in his autobiography rephrased it a little bit. He said, to be or not to bop, that is the question. And that is also the question here.
I met this guy, Henrik Iverson, who's the president of the Ben Webster Foundation.
Yeah, I know about him. He was a companion to Bud Powell and all these cats back in the day here.
But what was it about in Denmark that created such a respect and appreciation of jazz and elevated it to a high art at that time?
I would say I have a standard answer to that, and that is that the musicians were respected as artists. They were paid decently. There was no, we're talking about black musicians, there was no racial discrimination. And the girls were beautiful. So it's like 4 good points, you know. So they stayed here for a while. I think that the basic of this is that the Danes is the most trustworthy country in the world. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but 80% of all Danes trust each other, while in France it's only 15%. And this country is built on trust, and that's what Dexter Gordon, Ben Webster, Bud Powell, all of these people recognized. They were accepted as artists, and they could walk anywhere they wanted. I remember Ben Webster, I knew him quite well, I must say. He, after being here half a year, he said, there's something strange about you people here. What is it that you're after? You're so damn nice. Are you for real? You know, he didn't really
trust it.
It took him a long time to believe that he was welcome.
How many bicycles do you think that is?
Right over there?
Yeah.
562 bikes sitting right there.
In the square.
I'll tell you something else. That's very interesting. They're now locked.
Well, Hendrik said to me last night, Ben Webster was here for a few months before he said to Hendrik, everyone here is so nice, it can't be real.
Yeah.
Man, it's true, they're not locked, man. It's really wild. They're not locked. It's so flat here that, of course, this is a bicycle city.
As they say, it's downhill both ways.
Right here on the Frederick Sporgade. Heading back to the Kong Arthur Hotel.
Kong Arthur Hotel, which of course is where jazz musicians for years have gathered to celebrate in their own festive way.
Copenhagen is the home to a lot of legendary ghosts, American jazz musicians like Dexter Gordon and Chet Baker, who escaped the hard racist America of the 60s to find a kind of acceptance here in clubs like the Montmartre, which is still very much in operation. When you're on the stage at the Montmartre, you can't help but think that Dexter Gordon and Chet Baker and Johnny Griffin and Stan Getz and a lot of other cats looked out into that same room and saw the same crumbling sandstone wall, and that makes the notes come out a little different. It definitely affects the way you put your intention into the instrument.
Our man on the ground, Bob Rockwell, has been painting the picture for us for years of what Copenhagen is like, what the scene is like, what the summer is like, what the jazz festival is like. It was great to really see him in his native habitat. And I talked to him today a little bit about what it meant to go native here.
Mm-hmm. Bob's kind of a transitional figure, you know. He's very old school, and at the same time, he's been part of the education system here, so he really has seen it.
The image of the American in Europe was so powerful to some people, right? Like the idea of, I'm going to go to Europe and be a player.
Yeah, absolutely. It was to me. I left the United States because of the political system in the States when I was very young. So I made that decision when I was a very young man. But
you knew you wanted to leave the States, and then you had to figure out where to go.
Yeah, but I ended in Denmark by accident, like 32 years ago, I think. But I knew I was going to live in Europe.
I want to talk to you about this jazz festival. This is a jazz festival that features international musicians who come to Denmark and also a lot of local players, and you are both.
I think I'm mostly local now, man. You know.
Do you feel like a local player?
Oh yeah, I you know, when I first came here, a lot of cats actually told me don't get local, like don't play, you know, in the Fontaine and all these other places. They said just be exclusive, you know, and use this as a base and shit. And I knew right away, you know, I told him, I said, man, first of all, I just want to play. I wasn't like looking at myself as having like a career like that. You know, I was here, I was going to play any place I could and develop my music. And that's, you know, so.
And then you became local.
I became local, and I luckily, you know, and I worked all the time too. So, you know, I didn't have to go on the road for the most of the time.
So it was a good thing to be local.
I think so, in the end, you know.
So you had this moment last night when this kid came up to you after the show.
Kid came up to me after the show, nice kid, young, in his 20s, said to me, gee, I really liked what you were talking about. I liked the music. It was great. He said, I come to the Copenhagen Festival every year. He said, and I never know what to look for. He and his pal, they come, and they don't know anything about jazz, really, but they like it. And he said, you know, and the problem is we kind of wander around, and sometimes we find stuff we really like, and, you know, sometimes not so much. So I was trying to be helpful, you know. I was saying, well, you know, maybe it's a good idea to go to small venues because that way it's more intimate or whatever. You know, if you go to a large park where there are 5,000 people, it's going to be a different experience. It's more... He said, yeah, but I don't think that's what he was interested at all. I think he just wanted a map. He wanted to know what jazz was, more or less, and he wanted to like get the outlines of the pool he was going to swim in.
Right, but of course we don't even know what the outlines of the pool are anymore. No, he wants to be informed to some degree, though, right? He wants to feel that he did the due diligence of experiencing jazz, because it's sort of become an understanding that this is, you want to be cultured, this is something, it's a stop on the way to being cultured.
I love it. The due diligence of understanding jazz. That's exactly right. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Who cares? You know. I mean, ultimately, jazz is it's a historical phenomenon. I mean, it's going to go down in history as this great thing, sort of like the Crusades. You know, the Crusades aren't around anymore, but we talk about it.
Well, yes, the Crusades are not around anymore, but we talk about them. But some little Crusade DNA still exists.
I think that for sure. For sure. So you think that this festival phenomenon will always be in the cultural DNA?
Yeah, or whatever the cultural values of jazz will be in the DNA, and I think probably have influenced, you know, countless other aspects of the culture. Christian Brorson, who runs the Jazz House Montmartre, and I had a little conversation about how it impacts the clubs and how the festival relates and interacts with the local scene. What kind of impact do you think the Jazz Festival has on jazz in Denmark during the rest of the year?
Not enough. But I'm sure it creates a new audience, because that's where parents bring their kids to go out and have an ice cream and go to the park to see the big band concert. Or, I mean, that was how I went to Tivoli with my dad to see Buddy Rich. That was where I was caught. So in that sense, I think it's an event, and there's a lot of people who go out to events. They don't go out to a jazz club, but they go to an event, whether it be some kind of a festival. So that's a way of building a new audience. Yeah.
Do you feel like, because you run a club, do you feel like saying to people, but we're here all year round, don't forget that we're here even when there's no festival?
Yes, of course. Having concerts in January where people have less money, it's I wish that we had more people going out. Or no, maybe not that. I wish that the media would have some attention, because we don't have it in TV, we don't have it in radio. It's out of focus during the year, and then we suddenly have the festival, and then it's interesting, and then they forget.
Kind of reminds me of how one time there was this Japanese businessman who wanted to buy the Village Vanguard in New York. His idea was to take it back to Tokyo and reopen it, and have the world's most famous jazz club there. And he offered $1 million. I don't know if Max Gordon was still alive at the time, or if he offered it to Lorraine, but he wanted to buy this club and take it apart brick by brick and move it. And this was back when $1 million was worth $800,000 anyway. But Max or Lorraine, whoever it was, turned him down. Didn't sell the place. And it's a good thing, because, the Vanguard is basically a hole in the ground. And it would have been tough to move a hole in the ground to Tokyo. I mean, you could recreate the pictures on the walls and even bring the piano over, but would the subsoil of Tokyo reverberate in the same way that it does in New York City? I doubt it. And so the magic room and the magic that's in the room really can't be bought and sold. Because if what we're buying and selling is a kind of nostalgia, then the notes we're playing, they're just like fireflies buzzing around the campfire. And what we're really selling are the hot dogs, and not the flames and the warmth that come from the fire.
Despite our intention this week to kind of blend into the scenery and pretend that there's nothing going on here and just pay no attention to the...
A geek with the microphone in his beard.
Exactly. The bottom line is we were also here to play some gigs. And man, we turned the room out.
Yeah. We house rocked it. I mean, I think that what we do is so effective, particularly in Europe. In the United States, there's a tradition of what we call house rocking, where you come in, you have a good time, it's a Tuesday night, and as Art Blakey said, you help the people wash away the dust of everyday life. But in Europe, they don't get to see that. It's not a natural thing here. People don't naturally do it. Young people aren't learning it. And so when we show up and we do this thing that we do, it really has an effect.
The future ain't what it used to be, and the past never was. That's the first thing to come together. Things ain't what they used to be, and they never were. And I want you to cast your minds back 32,000 years ago in the caves of Lascaux, France. You went into those caves, there was art on the wall, pictures of animals, pictures of human hands. Those people looked just like us. The only difference was they didn't have clocks, they didn't have bedtime. They could stay up until they fell down. But they fell in love. They fell in love. L-O-V. The only other difference was they couldn't spell it. See, they didn't have any grammar.
I can't help but thinking that it's not just the music itself, but the personality of all four of us on the band. Obviously between the four of us, there's got to be over 100 years of experience playing together if you combine it all, right? It's a lot of history there, and you just can't rehearse that or buy that kind of trust among musicians.
Well, that's when Blakey talked about putting his bands together. One of the things he always said was, man, there's some cats I'd like to have in the band. They're good players, but they don't necessarily fit. And I think what we've got going is something that's entirely at the other end of the scale. It's about the fit, and it's about the feeling of a band. What does a band feel like? And what does it feel like when four people come from not just a sympathetic place artistically or musically or in terms of education, but dare I say spiritually, dare I say in terms of calling the spirit into the room?
The other thing that I really don't think you can discount is that not everybody would know what to make of a bass player who's also in the manure cleaning business.
Well, Billy Peterson is what I like to refer to as a free-range bass player. I mean, first of all, he too is a kind of a savant. He can play everything, but don't ask him what the changes are, because he's just got huge ears. He's got great musical radar. And he's a character of the first order. What are you going to say?
There's nobody like him. Of that we can be sure.
Of that we can be sure.
One of my best running buddies invents this machine with his company. Okay, it's called Bluetech, B-L-U-T-E-Q. Nice name, right? Okay, so Bluetech is a company that invented this machine that cleans up all the manure piles that the feedlots have. We clean all that stuff and we run it through this drying process. It's an infrared drying process. We take all the pathogens and carcinogens out of the manure because the EPA is coming down on all these feedlots all the time, right? So what comes out, you have a big mound coming in of manure. So it reduces the pile to a fifth of the size, takes all the moisture out and all the pathogens, and what comes out of that is grade A soil enhancer. Now, here's the question. You say, well, Willard, is that fertilizer? And my answer to you would be no, Ben, it's not. And what it is soil enhancer. When it comes on the other side and then we take all the pathogens out, it's soil enhancer, and you throw that on your soil. Okay, so if you put that in a glass of water, it won't break down. What happens is, though, the microorganisms in the soil come up and attack that, just like they attack something dead you bury it and they eat it completely.
Like a body.
Like a body. A body of a bird. It could be a body of a person. It could be a body of anybody, of course. So what it does is it attacks the microorganisms that attack this. And what do? Well, if you eat it, what does it have to do? It's got to come out. It goes in, it's got to come out. Okay, what comes out is grade A soil.
Speaking of hot dogs, the big question here in Copenhagen this summer, as it is everywhere else in the jazz world, it's about the highly educated young players coming out of music schools everywhere and the fantastic education everybody's getting these days. I call it the whiplash syndrome. Prepare for Lincoln Center and expect the worst. There are a lot of interesting tangents to this phenomenon, like the fact that we agree that there are fewer and fewer actual jazz stylists today because everybody's learning how to play out of the same textbook. Or as the late great Bob Belden pointed out, if the jazz musician has to tell a story in his solo, and the only story kids today have to tell is what it's like to spend 10 hours a day in the college practice room, that's going to get old fast. Or more to the point, it's not going to get old ever. It's going to be a problem solved rather than a life lived.
I really liked that conversation that you and I had with Bob Rockwell and Billy Peterson the other night backstage at our gig at the Montmartre about jazz education.
We came up in the old school way, but there obviously are other ways these days.
That you can't really say too much publicly about the education scene because it is the only economic mechanism that's real in jazz. It's the only thing where there's real money changing hands. Mm-hmm. So nobody's going to say too much about it because they don't.
Hey, I got to do business with you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I've never had any bad thoughts about jazz education or negative.
But in the States, think about this. In the States, in order to get a degree from one of the major jazz institutions, unless you get a full scholarship, you have to spend so much money. Jazz is becoming music for rich people. Because who can afford $150,000 or $200,000 of an education? Rich white kid.
It's interesting, man.
Does this breed out the why you and I did it in rock, why we came up? Okay, why was that? There was no fucking schools. There was nothing.
No.
So does that breed out the passion?
I like that. It breeds out the passion. That's very interesting because I've been beating around the bush all day long about something that, like, we all got involved for. I've been saying that's spiritual or something, or the life or authenticity.
Fuck that, man. When
Fuck
we were
that.
Kids,
that's all we cared about.
Yeah, that was we lived, breathed that motherfucker 24/7.
In some instances, guys that are really creating stuff, it affords them a way to make some extra money. I mean,
it affords the people who are making something an opportunity to make some money. What responsibility does the system, for-profit education system, have to the students?
Yeah, but eventually the students have to be able to play good enough for anybody to want to listen to them.
But what's waiting for them when they come out of school?
There are gigs, and there's places to play, and if you don't sound good, you're not going to get those gigs. Like, I didn't go to school, okay? So how did I learn what I learned?
Good question.
I learned from asking the cats on the older guys on the bandstand what was going on.
But there's a big difference between you choosing who you want to ask and choosing what you want to ask them, as opposed to handing somebody $100, sitting in a chair and say, tell me what I need to know.
Give me the curriculum. I got a funny take on this, man. I don't think you can teach jazz in a room with neon lights. That's just by definition. I think if there's neon lights in the room, jazz is not going to happen there. Jazz does not happen where there is neon. Unless it's outside in front advertising the club.
I was just going to say, exactly.
But this is the question. When you have a private institution, something that is in business to make money, I mean, obviously they have a mandate and the reputation is supported by the product, the result. Do we put out musicians that play well? Do they make us look good? But at the end of the day, if you have a school that is in business, will the school ever say to a kid, you know what?
I hear you.
Become an accountant.
Okay, then here's the other question.
Yeah.
Does that system, does it set the bar higher for musicianship because of the schools?
I think it absolutely does. I think you're correct there.
But the truth of the matter is, none of us went to music school. So we don't actually know.
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't actually know what happens there.
That's right.
We don't know what's going on there.
That's right.
I love that we ran into all these cats in the hotel. I was really overwhelmed before we got here because I was thinking, how are we going to see people and how are we going to find them? We're going to have to run around all over the place. And then, of course, the first night we got here, we walked out the front door and there were the Yellow Jackets, Russ Ferrante and Bob Mintzer and Will Kennedy just standing in front of the hotel, almost as if they were waiting for us.
I know. And we got to walk down to the club together.
Yeah.
And on the way down there, I talked to Mintzer about what he's been doing. He's teaching at USC, and we talked a little bit about what the students are like these days. What are their concerns?
They're coming out of high school jazz programs where it's like you do this, and this. You learn these tunes, and you learn these scales and these chords, and then you play. I didn't come at it from that direction, So, I came at it more from the mentorship model where, somebody said, don't play that shit, like Buddy, it's like, so I had to sort of take that home and translate that, or this guy in the Basie band heard me play a ballad. He said, that sounded like shit, man, play something pretty, play pretty. And I took that home and sort of deciphered it and went, what does that mean, So what would I change? So some of the young students are a little uncomfortable with that model. I have students, I teach this class called Elements. Some of these kids, they're saying, man, you're not sticking to the curriculum. I said, well, life isn't a curriculum, and sometimes something becomes apparent in terms of what you all are doing that warrants maybe veering away from the curriculum and working on something else, that's appropriate for what's happening here and now. And they don't like that. Some of them are cool, but when you're there twice a week for the whole year, you're that old guy that's always telling me what to do. I'm really sort of learning that more academic kind of lingo and learning how to be more organized and how to really articulate what it is we do.
And then when we were sitting in the club a little later on, I was talking to Russ Ferrante also about teaching. Where are these students at, and what is it that we can give the students these days?
I always feel like a student, and I've been doing all this teaching at USC, and I'm full-time faculty there, and I've been teaching a lot there the last, say, 10 years, 15 years. But I can never really feel like an expert with the students. I think there's so many different ways to go about learning, and hopefully I have some experience and knowledge, but I'm not so attached to it. I'm ready to sort of say, I don't know anything, and what do you think? That's more my comfort zone.
So you feel like you're learning from the students?
Yeah, absolutely. And just like trying not to get so stuck or just take the view that now I know all this shit because I'm older and I've done all this stuff. I mean, as a teacher, I offer things that have been helpful to me, but I don't assume they're necessarily going to help every student. You know, someone else is going to need something else that I don't know anything about. So,
Bob was saying that sometimes students are confused or upset when he deviates from a curriculum.
Yeah, well, you know, maybe that's one thing that's interesting. Well, when I was learning, and I was basically self-taught, and I would take lessons with other professional musicians to get ideas, that I really wanted the information and went after it, was really driven, and if I got a little scrap of something, I would try to pull it apart and figure out, well, what else could I do with this? But I find a lot of the students now want you to take their hand and say, okay, do this, now next week, do this. It's the rarest student that will really be a self-starter and self-motivator. They're kind of waiting for you to tell them what to do, and I don't know that that's a recipe for really getting it together.
I had a quick talk today with Kenny Barron after his sound check, and we talked a little bit about education as well. I asked him, you know, what was his jazz education like when he was coming up, and he told me there was no real jazz education as such when he was coming up. He did have some classical education, but there was no real jazz curriculum, and you had to learn it from the guys. And how did you learn? Who were your teachers, and how did they approach showing you the music? You know, I imagine it was before there was so much formalized jazz education. Like
there was none. So I kind of learned from the street.
Yeah.
You know, but I had my brother. I had my older brother who was there, so he had a fantastic collection of 78 records. You know, so I had a chance to listen to those. And Philly also had a really great radio station, jazz radio station. I don't know if you know Joel Dorn.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, well, he was one of the DJs.
Sure.
And he used to play great music, you know, really great stuff, you know.
And you had so many local cats.
Yeah, local guys, you know, coming up with Sonny Fortune, Reggie Workman was around Philly at the time. So, you know, I had a chance to really play, and there were a lot of little clubs.
Yeah.
You know, where you could work on your craft.
Well, that's the big question for me, is that you have access to all of these records today and YouTube, and you can see it all. But is it different to sort of see it online or on a record as opposed to going to the club and really actually witnessing it?
I think you need to see it live. I think that's really, I think that's important. You know, to be up close and personal with the music and with the musicians. That's really important.
What do you think is the value of getting time with the musicians?
Well, I mean, you get to, first of all, you get to humanize them. You don't see them as some sort of idol over there. They're really just people. And for the most part, really nice people.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
but sometimes just hearing something from them can be more instructive than just reading something out of a book or you know, taking a lesson, but actually hearing something about voicings, or that can really be instructive, and it stays with you.
Did you talk to Kenny Barron at all about Joey Alexander? I'm sure he's aware of him. I wonder what advice he would give a kid like that.
Man, Kenny brought Joey up, as everybody really has that we've been talking to. It really is the kind of subtext underneath all of what's going on here. Everybody's thinking about it because it obviously represents something so big. And, Kenny Barron said, I don't think I'd have much to teach him, but I'd like to hear him play a whole note.
Mm-hmm. This young kid who's everybody's talking about now.
Joey Alexander.
Yeah. I mean, he plays great, My only thing is that he's going to be a star before he can really learn anything, Well, he's not going to be able to serve any kind of apprenticeship, working for somebody else. So, but, hopefully he'll have his head on straight. That's the main thing.
How important do you think it is to work as a sideman before you become a leader?
I think it's important, I mean, you're almost forced to be a band leader today, though, because of the economic situation back there. There aren't a lot of bands, So you're kind of forced to create your own situations. So, I can't argue with that.
Yeah, right.
I can't argue with that, But I guess this is a question of getting some experience under your belt before you really jump out there,
It's funny, we ran into Larry Grenadier in the lobby of the hotel today, and he played on the Joey Alexander record.
Yeah, right.
And I asked him, once the tape was rolling or once you were playing, obviously you look at the kid, he's 10 years old, but when you're making music, did you have any sense that you were playing with a kid as opposed to a more established musician?
Well, it's a good question because, in the midst of it, no, I guess. I'm just approaching it like, how can I make this sound better? So, no, it's really not different, which is, amazing for somebody who's not only 12, but has very little experience playing with other people, right? I mean, he really...
It's a freaky thing.
It's a freaky thing, right? We've been talking about it because everywhere we go, people are,
Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's been coming up a lot.
Yeah.
Have you seen him play?
Well, just on television, or, he sounds great.
What is your perspective on it? Because I mean,
there's so many gifted young players coming out of schools, but he's different somehow.
He's different somehow, and 11, 12 is super young. I mean, I've seen cats 15, 16,
Yeah.
But this is like another.
That's another thing, and if it's true he didn't have lessons, or if he had...
Not that I know of.
What is that? What could that possibly be?
Well, I mean, some of it's different now with YouTube. People have direct access to, no matter where you live, you can hear whatever you want. That's new, right? So I think that, but still, to be able to reach that level just through YouTube, and, CDs is really bizarre.
Leo was saying last night, it's sort of like taking a 12-year-old, well, let's say a 6 or 7-year-old kid who was raised in America, taking him to a Chinese restaurant and he starts ordering in Mandarin.
Right, speaking that language.
How is that possible? Because jazz is, people spend their lives trying to get a handle on that.
I know. I almost didn't want to think about it too much in the midst of it because I felt like this was just his special thing that he somehow figured out.
Do you think it's a part of a larger trend of younger musicians that you're seeing?
I definitely see it, but not at that age.
Yeah.
I see some amazing, just like with bass, for example, I see so many great young 18, 19, 20-year-old bass players who have the technique all together. I mean, I was playing very young, but I had nothing close to that. So they figured out the way around the instrument really early, so now they can get to the music. The physical thing is done, That I see that much more in the last 10 years.
And how is that different from the way you came to the music and the instrument?
Everything was a struggle. I mean, just like figuring out how to get a sound out of the bass. I mean, there's certain physical things like they figured out about the bass, how to set up a bass in the last 15 years that have really helped the instrument, I think. So when you pick up the bass when you're young now, it's easier to get to, I think. This helps. I don't know. And I think each instrument has a certain moment. Like right now there's a lot of good bass players. 10 years ago there's a lot of great young drummers. So it seems like instruments kind of have a certain heyday, and then it goes on to the next one.
You think that has to do with the teachers?
I think it's a lot of things. Yeah, certain influences that are prevalent that they hook onto, and the way the instrument's set up, I think, has helped the bass. But yeah, it's a lot of things. Thanks, man. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, likewise. This is not the first time we've been recorded together. During the Art of the Trio first record at the Vanguard, Ben and I were sitting at the bar, and Brad went into this thing in Monk's Dream, and at the end of it, we yelled, and it's on the record.
Is that right? You can hear yourself?
Yeah, I heard myself,
That's great when that happens. Yeah. I'm on an Art Blakey record like that.
Really?
Yeah,
Seriously?
from the Keystone, yeah. That's great.
That's great to see you, man. Thanks so much.
It's like that ice cream you buy sometimes at these fast food places and it doesn't melt because it's made of chemicals and not ice and cream. It might be the blues, but it don't taste like the blues used to. Count Basie's sense of tempo is nowhere to be found in a college syllabus, which is maybe why so many young players today are so interested in odd meters. If swing is old-fashioned, you might as well try to keep it interesting, you know. But aside from this discussion about time passing and the way it moves, another fallout from the jazz education revolution is that if you can get the same instruction everywhere in the world, then why bother to hire an American musician or an American rhythm section at a European jazz festival? And this is starting to happen too. The jazz education revolution is turning American jazz from the mother tongue into just another regional dialect. American jazz used to be its own way of walking and talking. How long before it's globalized and monetized and sanitized? And, well, you get the picture.
Do you think there's anything connected, any connection between the way the Danes are personally and the way they play? Is there anything about like the kind of Danish mentality and the Danish way of playing?
If you listen to what so-called Scandinavian jazz, but there is a Scandinavian thing, definitely.
Interesting.
But you could, in a way, you could say it's kind of like based on Keith Jarrett in a way. It's devoid of any blues things. You know, they, as a matter of fact, they stay as far away from it as they can. They also absolutely, I know people here that stay as far away from any kind of 2/5 harmonies or blues harmonies. It's absolutely not going to come into their palate at all. They just absolutely don't want to, because it's not them.
Because they don't feel it's authentic to them.
It's not authentic to them. And it doesn't invalidate their music to me at all. I mean, that attitude. It's like, I can dig it. It's a totally valid attitude to have. Any music is valid, and it's you know.
But you think that might be a Scandinavian thing or a Danish thing? What?
It's definitely a Scandinavian thing. But I can even tell you that maybe 10 years ago, they were actively talking about not having so much American jazz at the festival and having more and more European jazz.
Man, the jam session last night after our gig was such a scene, I thought. I loved seeing those young musicians, that harmonica player Matthias, that young alto player Ollie Wallace. It was so great. What's your name?
Matthias Heise.
How old are you? I heard you were 21.
I am 21. Yeah. I don't know why I said that.
You sound great, man.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks.
Man. How long have you been playing?
Well, since I was 8 years old, so quite a long time. But I started out on the diatonic harmonica.
Yeah.
You know, the blues harp.
Yeah.
And then I switched to the chromatic. That's about 7 years ago or something like that.
Hey man, let's go outside for a second.
Yeah. It's kind of a rare instrument, so it was. It quickly became, a big part of my identity, because I was very young when I picked it up. That I was a harmonica player, and there weren't very many harmonica players around there. So
I actually think that in chromatic harmonica playing, between Grégoire Marais and Antonio Serrano, some of the most interesting jazz harmonica players today are European.
Yeah.
And I think you're joining that tradition.
Great. I love Antonio Serrano. He's my big hero, man.
Man, so what do you want to do?
I've just been accepted at the conservatory in Denmark, so I'm gonna go there for a couple of years.
What are you listening to? How did you develop your sound and your approach?
Yeah, well, I try to listen a lot to saxophone players, especially Michael Brecker at the moment. I'm very fond of him, but also Charlie Parker and John Coltrane and guys like those. So I think I really need to go that way instead of I've listened a lot to Tielemans, of course, but to take the harmonica in new directions, I think it's a good place to go. In a field like the saxophone, where there have been a lot of development over the last years, and it's been taken to a very extraordinary level, and I want to grab some of that to the harmonica.
Do you think about going to the States, or you feel like there's enough opportunity in Europe?
At the moment, I quite like actually Denmark and the conservatory in Denmark, but I definitely want to go there and on maybe shorter trips to play and jam and stuff like that. But a lot of people have said to me that they thought I should go to New York and study and stuff like that. But I guess I'm kind of too fond of Denmark to do that.
You have a very high level of musicianship in Denmark, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Man, thank you so much and good luck, man. You sound great. What a trip.
I was very impressed that you knew both Gregoire and Antonio. You must be very knowledgeable.
I've just been lucky to hear them both, and when you hear something great, you recognize it.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. Yeah.
Check out this alto player.
Oh! What are you doing here? Man?
What are you feeding?
What are you feeding over here, man?
What are you feeding these kids?
This shit is out. Whoa! That motherfucker played his dick off. He better do it.
I gotta do a
panty check.
I gotta talk to him, man. But check out this kid. This kid's 21 too. This alto player.
Okay, so Christian just told me that Matthias, the harmonica player, and Ollie Wallace, that alto player, they're 20, 21 years old, whatever it is, and they're both in the music college. And I said, well, why are they in the music college? He said, because the government pays them $800 a month. And so for 4 years, they can get some money and play music. It's almost as if the government is subsidizing the natural musicians so that they can be part of the college, even though the college can't teach them anything.
I asked the kid, the harmonica player, if he ever thought about going to the States. He said, yeah, I'd like to go there to do some jamming, but I'd prefer to stay here right now.
Right. It's not as competitive.
So there's a couple things here. Number one, obviously the language is reaching every corner of the planet. We know this already. People are hearing it. They have access to it. And the other thing is, something is happening where these younger and younger musicians are getting in touch with the music, and they're understanding the language earlier and earlier.
Well, and when you hear musicians like that, kids like that, that's a phenomenon. That's not something that, obviously they practiced and they learned and stuff, but that's not something you can really teach. You can learn it, but I don't think you can teach that, because both of these kids who are a phenomenon didn't get it in high school. They didn't teach it in high school, and they're going to college now to do this because they can make some money. But this is the Joey Alexander syndrome, whatever that is.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's happening all over the world, in every corner of the world. Younger and younger talented musicians who hear the language, they understand it, they can speak it, they teach themselves to speak it. To hear a kid like that play, and then to have him say, I want to stay here and play this music. They're not looking to, he said to me, I want to try to find a way to push the boundaries of the harmonica. So lately I've been listening to a lot of Michael Brecker and thinking about how do you apply Michael Brecker's concept to the harmonica. But he doesn't feel that he needs to be in New York or Boston to do it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that is part of the phenomenon when you're talking about people who are speaking the idiom as well as it can be spoken. They're young and they don't seem to have any interest in conquering New York City or coming to the States. So I guess we really have to say that the music has insinuated itself like a virus into the culture of the world.
It's an interesting question because in the United States, jazz musicians are constantly engaged in an ongoing conversation about
who the music belongs to, where it comes from, and what the responsibility is of the musicians to honor the tradition and the past, whatever that may be. These are kids we're talking about from Copenhagen or Bali or wherever, where the tradition and the context that created the music is so far removed from what their reality is, and yet they speak the language that was developed and emerged out of the context and the social conditions of the United States.
What I love is that they're not particularly interested in bringing it to the United States and doing it there. I love the fact that they're comfortable being who they are, where they are.
But that is, not to put too fine a point on it, that is the message of jazz, is to be yourself where you are, when you are.
Wow, isn't that something? This music has insinuated itself all over the world in these young people. I mean, I was saying to Billy, man, hearing these kids really gives you faith in something, I'm not sure what. In the music, I guess. In faith that the music doesn't need anybody to take care of it. The music's taking care of itself.
Well, exactly. And this is a bigger question that, for example, when you study the great works in university, there's always a question about whether or not you can ever really read a great work or evaluate a great piece of art independent of the context that produced it. If it's great, isn't it great? No matter what?
Or no matter where, or no matter when?
These guys are, in some ways, keeping the music alive, and when you go into a club like that that's filled with young, excited people, it does give you a certain amount of inspiration, because obviously all over the United States as well there are clubs filled with young people that are digging the music and having a drink and grooving, but when you see it over here, it's very vibrant and it feels in some ways even more relevant.
It's like jazz has grown up. It's grown out of the little enclaves, and it's loose in the world, like the English language, or like what?
Well, the English language is a great example, because all over the world, English is spoken as a language of commerce and communication. If you have somebody from Japan and somebody from Germany, and they need to communicate, chances are they're going to choose English to communicate with one another. And so we have had to kind of come to terms with the fact that we don't have ownership over the language that we consider to be our native language. That there's all these other people in the world speaking it, and that they have just as an equal a claim to use it, because they use it for their purposes of communication. And in some ways, the language of jazz, or not just jazz, but the language of the music that emerged out of the American experience, is like English.
I've always thought that the only thing in the end that we're able to do that other people can't do is popular culture. But the fact is, it appears that the popular culture might have come out of the States, but they can do it as well as we can. Now, the question is, you heard great players play something that was created, essentially, the innovation of it came out of the United States. That idiom came out of the United States, but they're mastering it at a young age naturally, as well as anybody has ever played it.
Now here's the question. Can they, in addition to mastering it, reframe it in a way that forces us in the United States to confront it again in a new light? For example, earlier tonight I was talking with the guys in Dave Sanborn's band about the United Kingdom and the tradition going back to the 60s of British musicians taking the American blues and rock and roll forms and recasting them in a new light, and then selling them back to the United States.
Absolutely.
They sold us back our shit.
Yeah.
They really did, man. No one in America cared about blues guitar until, Cream and Yardbirds and Hendrix. That shit came along, man.
It's like we've always said, and it's what Coltrane said, this music doesn't belong to anybody. It passes through all of us.
Is it that the music is somehow just out there now in such a ubiquitous way that people kind of know it? Is there something universally true about it, which I think you would like to believe, right? There's actually a universal truth in the language of jazz that belongs to all of us?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe there's something so human about this music. This music, like I like to think that people have essentially been playing this music for thousands of years. They just called it jazz when they called it jazz at some point, 100 and some years ago. But the idea of what this music is, groove music, blues music, melodic music, a music with a grammar that comes out of the human ability to do certain language things. You're born with the ability to learn languages. That's part of who we are, and it's part of the human experience. Obviously, the answer to the Joey Alexander phenomenon is that he's born with it. We are born with it. He's a phenomenon, but basically it has to say that people are born with this. It's
Well, in that case, then, learning the music is actually just a process of uncovering what's there as opposed to grafting some new knowledge onto who we are.
Isn't that something? It's like we remember the music.
Exactly, man. And this leads me to the final thought, which is that, I've heard you refer to Joey Alexander as the Dalai Lama of jazz piano.
Right. It's like they're going to take some personal effects of Art Tatum and Bud Powell and put it in front of a bunch of kids and the one who picks them out. Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. This music was really created by a handful of people. I mean, probably hundreds, not thousands, originally. And it kind of spread it's kind of like a metaphor for how sapiens came out of the Rift Valley. 150,000 years ago, whatever it was, there was a small tribe, and now there are 8 billion of them.
It is a metaphor. It's the same thing, right? And that's why it's just as easy to say and just as reasonable to say we all share common ancestry. We all share a common mother, in the same way that it's fair to say anybody who puts the horn in their mouth is playing the music of Louis Armstrong.
Yeah. I think Wynton said, you can't play jazz without playing Louis Armstrong. You can't do it. Or, anybody playing any kind of modern music today is playing Charlie Parker.
Right.
So we have these visionaries who come along from time to time and move the meme further ahead. But, it really does seem like there's this inherent ability to understand the ineffable somehow. It's wonderful. It's like I say, it really gives you faith to hear a kid play like that.
Excellence always happens on the margins. And as long as there's excellence in anything that's taking place, it serves as a kind of a beacon for the rest of the world. So excellence here has happened. It doesn't have to be populist for it to point to a sense of optimism and hope in general for the next generation.
Excuse me, but you accuse me of taking it out automatically, and I just want to say that where you just went is probably beyond where I've been for the whole day. And basically, you're under arrest.
But I'm not wrong.
Didn't say you were wrong. I just
arrest
said
me, but
I will be acquitted by a jury of my peers if you can find them.
The sun is shining. We're in Copenhagen for the festival, and the hang is on. We're at the Kong Arthur Hotel, where for years the after party in the bar is the real center of the discussion. To be or not to bop echoes off these hallowed walls.
I didn't have a plan. There was no career plan. I just woke up every day and hit it and did what I thought I should do and kept going. And survival's a big part of making it in jazz.
Well, I think we can feel a certain amount of optimism then, because I didn't talk to one young musician on the ground here who had any kind of plan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Not only did they not have any kind of plan, but most of the musicians we talked to here were fairly content. I didn't feel an edge, or nobody badmouthed anybody, and nobody was complaining about the record business, which there is none.
Well, when you got nothing to lose.
There it is. But what you do have is you got the music.
That's right.
And it's sort of pretty obvious that it comes down to the music, and that's the power here.
All in all, man, I gotta say, I think it was just a great little trip here. I can't believe we pulled it off. I can't believe I was able to shove that microphone into so many faces and get away with it, but there it was.
And the gigs were great. I mean, the sessions were hallelujah happy. Definitely one of those great weekends to file away, to have in our little, they used to have these little gree pouches back in the day that you'd take out the amulets when you needed some strength. I think we can take a lot of strength from a weekend like this.
You really going to wrap it up on the gree pouches? That's where
no, I'm not going to do that. Okay,
I liked it. No, I thought it was good.
It wasn't that great. No, it wasn't.
When was that?
Where did that come from?
When did that happen?
Well, that's back in New Orleans, I think, when people used to have gree pouches, and I don't know where that came from.
What do you put in a gree pouch?
Where did that come from? Ground up chicken bones and bat teeth, and I don't know what's in the gree.
The bat teeth, really?
Yeah. Well, I don't know why this weekend has nothing to do with bat teeth. Let me start again. What was the question?
See you in Newport, man.
Solid.
We thank you for flying with us today and hope to welcome you back on board sometime soon again.